Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. I'm Josh Durrell, CEO of the Wyoming Business Council, and I want to welcome you to another conversation in our Building Wyoming's Future series. This series exists for one simple reason. Wyoming is at an inflection point, and if we're going to build a future that's sustainable, economically, socially, and culturally, we have to be able to we have to be willing to listen as much as we talk. Over the last several years, one issue has kept resurfacing in almost every conversation about Wyoming's future: the outmigration of our young people. You've probably heard the statistics. You've likely heard opinions about why this is happening. And many of us, whether we're parents, grandparents, employers, educators, or policymakers, have our own assumptions. Today is intentionally different. This is not a panel of experts talking about young people. It's an opportunity to hear directly from young Wyomingites themselves about the decisions they're making, the trade-offs they're weighing, and what would actually make staying or returning viable. We're calling this conversation the exit interview for a reason. Exit interviews are not about assigning blame. They're about learning. They're about understanding what is working, what's not, and what conditions would need to change if we want different outcomes. One thing I want to be very clear about at the onset: being honest about challenges does not mean we're giving up on Wyoming. And optimism without honesty doesn't serve anyone either. Our goal today is to hold both, to listen carefully without defensiveness and without turning real concerns into a self-fulfilling story that says opportunity doesn't exist here. That's why this conversation is a partnership. We're grateful to be joined by WyoFile, whose reporting has helped examine this issue statewide, and who will be moderating today's discussion with the journalistic integrity it deserves, and by Engage Wyoming, whose work ensures young people aren't just invited into the conversations, but actually heard. Whether you're a young person making these decisions right now, a parent thinking about your kid's future, a business leader worried about workforce, or a policymaker shaping the next legislative session, this conversation is for you. My hope is that you'll listen not for answers you already agree with, but for insights that challenge assumptions, including your own. With that, I'll turn it over to the team at WyoFile to guide the conversation. Thank you again for being here and for being part of Wyoming's future.
Good. Well, thank you, Josh. Hello, everybody. I'm Dustin Blyzeffer, and I cover climate and energy at WyoFile, based here in Casper. And I want to begin by telling you a little bit more about WyoFile. We're a nonprofit news organization, and we were founded way back in 2008 by a bunch of old school print journalists who, way back then, understood that the journalism landscape was changing and that it was time for a new business model to serve Wyoming readers. WyoFile is independent and nonpartisan. And that means that we're not here today to advocate for the Wyoming Business Council or any of its programs, or even necessarily to advocate for any particular idea we discuss here today. We ask questions, we scrutinize assumptions, and we dig in to figure out what's really going on. But we are a public interest news service, and our motto is that we report on the people, places, and policy of Wyoming. Our mission is to inform and engage, and today the emphasis is on engaging. So Tennessee and I are excited to have this conversation with y'all. Before I hand it over to our moderator, a little bit about myself. I grew up in Gillette. I graduated from the University of Wyoming, and I kind of scraped and scrounged to work as a journalist here in Wyoming for more than 25 years. In addition to covering climate and energy, I'm really interested in workforce issues, which has inspired me in my reporting to examine and ask questions about the data and this narrative that says a lot of young people leave the state, and really trying to understand why that is. Why is this happening, and what does it mean? Um, there's one statistic that suggests that 60 to 70% of Wyoming born residents leave the state by the time they're 30. Um, there's also data to suggest that Wyoming's economy simply isn't growing and diversifying like it is in our neighboring states. Um, so, what do young people need to build their lives here, if that's their choice? There does appear to be consensus, at least among some leaders, that it's really important to stem the outmigration of youth, um, uh, and to make Wyoming more attractive to stay or to come back to. And I know from my reporting experience that often these conversations take place in the halls of Cheyenne, where, to be frank, um, there isn't a bunch of young people there who have the most at stake. But I happen to know for a fact that these conversations also happen around kitchen tables. As a side note, we have two sons in their 20s who are grappling with these same questions for themselves right now. They're both UW graduates, and they're both looking for jobs inside and outside Wyoming. So I'm excited to have this conversation with you all. Thank you all for being here. And now I'll hand it over to my WyoFile colleague, Tennessee Watson.
Thank you, Dustin. Thanks, Josh. I am WyoFile's managing editor. I'm going to moderate the panel. A couple things to keep in mind for the panelists. Please speak from your own personal experience. And for the audience, really listen to those stories as representative of just that individual's experience and not necessarily a group. Curiosity over debate is the value of this conversation. And I've asked the panelists to keep their answers to around 90 seconds, but I also don't want them to feel stifled either. So want them to really be able to share their story, but I might interject from time to time to let them know where they're at in terms of the timing. And to introduce the panelists, instead of rattling off bios, we're going to dive right into questions for these folks that hopefully gives them a chance to share some of their story. So we are going to start with Dylan Power. Dylan, you're a Cody High School senior. I understand that you've already been involved with Wyoming civic life.
Yes.
So
yes.
Yeah, I would just love to hear, immediately after high school, what is your plan, and tell us, why you've chosen that path.
Well, right now I'm looking at colleges outside of the state. I don't really intend on going to UW for a couple of reasons. One, I think there's just some better opportunities in colleges that aren't at UW. Specifically, we're looking at like foreign exchange. Some of the foreign exchange programs at CSU, for example, are just a little bit better. I plan on going into political science. That's been my, I've been so involved in civics in the state for quite a while now. It just makes sense for me to go into that path. But yeah, right now I'm looking at college outside of the state.
Thanks so much. Now we're going to go to Gwyneth Hargett. Gwen, you're from Cheyenne. You're currently a junior at the University of Wyoming. I understand you're studying international studies and political science.
Yes.
As you look ahead to life after graduation, what is the biggest question mark for you when it comes to building a future in Wyoming?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether I want to stay in Wyoming or leave Wyoming. I think I have a unique experience in the fact that I've had the opportunity to have internships across the state, which has led me to see a lot of unique perspectives and see people really doing work to make Wyoming a place that I want to stay. And I would love to give back to the state and stay in Wyoming to do those things. But also, I think that there exist so many national opportunities that I would love to pursue outside of Wyoming. So I think right now it's kind of up in the air, and thankfully I still have a little bit of time to decide. But yeah, I'm not quite sure.
Got it. Thanks. Maybe later we can talk a little bit more about what might sway your decision. Tristy Thomas is a junior in construction management in the construction management program at the University of Wyoming. And I understand that you grew up in Casper. You've had some opportunities both inside and outside of Wyoming. And I'm curious, how has that experience outside the state shaped your understanding of how you'll build a future in Wyoming?
Yeah, for sure. So I think one of the biggest things growing up in Wyoming was really the sense of community that I found. And being in the construction industry, that community is so strong where everybody takes care of each other. And just the experience I've had with that has really led me back to wanting to stay here and work here in the future. I lived in Tennessee for about a year and I loved it down there, but really, I mean, the state is so small and the industry is smaller that having those connections and networking opportunities has been really crucial in playing a role to why I want to stay here.
Great, thank you. Now we're going to go to Victoria Curtis. Victoria is a community manager at Chase in Wyoming. She focuses on financial education and stability. I understand you grew up in Cheyenne, you moved away, then you came back. Can you tell us about the challenges and opportunities you've experienced building a career in Wyoming?
Yeah, like a lot of the young people on this call, growing up in Cheyenne, I couldn't wait to leave. I didn't think there was much for me in Wyoming. For whatever reason, was dead set I'm not going to UW. So sorry to say, I went to CSU for a period of time and I loved Colorado. It was fun, it was engaging, there's a lot to do. And I got myself into a career that said, hey, we're going to send you back to Wyoming and we're sending you to Laramie, of all places, which was the exact city that I was trying to avoid. And I had a 5-year deadline. I said, I'm going to move back to my friends in Colorado. I'm going to move back to Fort Collins. And then I got connected. I got into Leadership Laramie. I started getting connected with the chamber. I started serving. And that service is what led me to love what I do and love where I live and love even where I work even more, and has led to the career that I'm in now. And I don't think if I had connected with other business owners and truly started to integrate the value of service into how I live every day, that I would be in the same spot now that I was then.
Thank you so much. And Aaron Gray is a third generation Wyomingite from Sheridan, now working in Houston's oil and gas industry as a landman. So he's coming to us from Texas. Aaron, when you left Wyoming, what did you need or what were you seeking that you didn't find here in Wyoming?
Yeah, I think that's a loaded question being in oil and gas. It was during COVID, so oil went negative. The industry was bad in Wyoming, and so that was kind of an obvious economic opportunity was not here in Wyoming. And as well as, my wife too, I was married at the time during COVID, and her career also, there was no economic opportunity for her as well. So both of us had to look at, we have to go somewhere else. And then I think at that time, as many of the young folks probably have seen as well, cost of living in Wyoming is just as high or higher than, Colorado or other places. And so, those are things you got to think about when you're trying to start a career. So those were kind of the two factors for us that we had to kind of move out of the state.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for bringing up the partner piece. It's important to remember that sometimes it's not just an individual decision.
Mm-hmm.
And Dalton Gregory, sixth generation Wyomingite, UW graduate, and I understand that you're a startup founder trying to build a company here in Wyoming. Dalton, you left the state, you returned to build your company. How has that experience shaped your perspective on what it takes to keep Wyoming's next generation of talent and entrepreneurs here?
Yeah, and really appreciate the opportunity to be on the call today. I think for me, moving to Florida was almost, I was wanting to travel and experience something new. But again, kind of to Aaron's point, my significant other actually was trying to take a job. So she's a nurse and had applied to hundreds of different jobs. And actually the first job she landed was in Florida of all places. So we moved down there. I think there was a lot of good things, a lot of pros and a lot of cons to it. One being, I think, humidity for the biggest reason I didn't like it. But the close knit community is, again, to play on that point, is just wasn't there in Florida. I work completely remote, so there's not a lot of in-person connection that I'm doing, but I think the barrier to entry is a lot lower, and people are, from my perspective, are a lot more friendly and outgoing in Wyoming. So yeah, I think that's my short course answer.
Got it. And did you have to sort of leave to realize that close-knit thing?
Yeah, I think so. There was I'm currently building a scam protection app, and Florida has actually launched this initiative called Operation Scam Shield. It's to try to protect older adults from scams. And so growing up in Wyoming, I guess I never thought about how easy it was, or the barrier to entry, to talk to people at the state level to try to get things moving. And over the last few months, trying to make this happen with Florida, it has been now I'm fighting tooth and nail to try to get a hold of someone. So I think that's another piece that really has helped me to realize the opportunity in Wyoming and how close knit everything is.
Great. Thank you all so much for answering those introductory questions, keeping you on your toes. Everybody's getting a different question. We really do want to focus on these panelists and their experience, but we also want the audience to be involved in this conversation as well. You're going to get a chance to ask questions at the end, but we're also going to do a couple polls throughout just to see what you all are thinking. So we have a question for you. If you had to name one factor that most influences a young person's decision to stay in or return to Wyoming, what is it? And I know sometimes these one factor, just pick one thing, question can be tricky. It's just a snapshot. It's how you're feeling now. Just pick one. We're going to kind of take the temperature in the room. And you'll see you select your age at the top and then pick the factor below.
Okay. All right. So while you're taking that poll, I have a question for all the panelists to answer, take a stab at. And it sounds simple, but it's probably a loaded question. But whether it be staying here in Wyoming or coming back, what would you need to build your future in Wyoming that is currently lacking? And we can start with Dylan.
Yeah, I'd love to touch on that. As a young person, something that we want to be able to do is go outside and communicate with each other and hang out with my friends. And a lot of those public spaces tend to be lacking in the fact that there's not a ton out there. There's not a lot to do in my small town. I live up in Cody. And other than, going shopping downtown, we could go to the park, we could go swimming in a lake. These services there's not a ton of them. There's not a lot of them. So a big factor of that would be something that I would like to see is more areas for young people to be able to inhabit and be able to enjoy.
What might those look like?
Yeah, they could be anything. They could just be, even something as small as a projector somewhere, a drive-in theater type thing, and do weekly events, something like that. Something that personally I'd like to see is something more annual, a once a week thing, a once a week program that we could all go to and attend and meet new people, because living in such a small area, living in such a, sparsely density of the state of Wyoming, it can be very difficult to meet new people that are, that don't go to school with me,
Yeah.
So anything with opportunities like that would let me meet new people that I might not know before would just be fantastic.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And Gwyneth, what would it take for you to, be confident to build your future in Wyoming that's maybe missing today?
Yeah, I'd say kind of a few things. For one, I think just access to more national level jobs, and maybe those exist and I'm just not quite aware of them, but I think maybe we promote those more would be awesome. But also, I think there's a lack of, dense, centrally located housing. I mean, that's the conversation everybody's having. But I think right now, when I think about my future, I'm not looking to build a home right now or pay a mortgage. Like, I'm looking to rent something, and having the opportunity to do that in a downtown area would be really awesome, which I think then kind of goes to Dylan's point too, with this idea of like third spaces. I would love to just have more abilities to bolster community with the people around me post college.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. And Tristy, same question to you.
Yeah, so I actually feel very fortunate in the fact that I want to stay in Wyoming and I feel like I currently have everything I need. And I credit that to really like how hard my teachers throughout high school and college have worked to bring industry partners to our classrooms. I haven't had to worry about job security a ton and feel like there's been tons of people that I've had the opportunity to network with that I feel like I could get a job in any corner of the state. And as I grew up here, I love to hunt, I love to be outside, and I love all of that that Wyoming offers. So I don't feel personally like anything's lacking, but I think that just has a lot to do with the field that I'm in and kind of my ideas surrounding the state of Wyoming, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. And Victoria Curtis.
I love this question, Dustin, especially because I left. And, something that Cheyenne has struggled with since I was a child was a rec center, right? Something to engage our youth outside of bars and alcohol. As a young adult, the lack of community involvement or the opportunities for that. Now, that was 15 years ago, right? When I was in my early 20s, Facebook was brand new, right? The access to social media wasn't as present. Now I can jump onto, a Facebook group and find some things to engage myself in, but you also have to have the desire to do that. But I see what my daughters are going through right now as they're freshmen in high school, and they're talking about wanting to leave. But they are in a different, completely different generation, right? And so their access to tech, their desire to explore looks different. But one of my daughters wants to be a business owner, and she said, how do I start a business here? And I'm like, well, that's a great question. She wants to be an esthetician. And we're seeing a lot of barriers to that right now. And so I think even just accessibility to help young adults, and one of my nonprofits, we help entrepreneurs get started. And we're seeing a lot of difficulty there right now with access to capital. So if I'm out of high school, I'm Dalton and I'm wanting to start a business, but I need access to capital. I may not be able to get that in Wyoming. Especially with where things are at right now with our climate. So those are some of the things that concern me, that I think are concerning, especially our very young adults right now.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Thank you. And Aaron, you left the state, both for your career and your spouse's career. Yeah, what would it take to make you seriously consider coming back to Wyoming that's currently missing?
No. This is a great question, and I see someone actually had a question that falls into this as well. They were asking if healthcare, maternal and reproductive care weighed on our decision. That definitely did. We have a 2-year-old now, so to kind of answer someone in the polls there. But I hear from the younger panelists something that obviously when I was growing up, Victoria kind of said the same thing. These, however you want to call them, public spaces, things to do. I kind of flip the question back to this panel, and kind of like, what is Wyoming's goal? Like, do we want to invest all that money into a lot of, rec centers, all these public centers, these public spaces, that may turn into like Colorado, if that's what we want to do, okay, great. But, I think there's also, me being in the third largest city, I can never run out of things for us that if we ever wanted to do if we were in our 20s. And so it's one of those things, if I would have left earlier, so I think this is the dilemma. Some young people will always leave. I think like Victoria said, tech, they can pull up Facebook or Instagram or TikTok and they can be like, wow, New York, San Francisco, all these cities. So um, I don't know if there's anything that can stop it. But for us to come back, Dustin, to answer the question, it'd be two things. It'd be for me being in oil and gas, and then for my wife's career, what's that look like? Do we have employment when we come back? Or at least the certainty of that we could find something. And then I think on the other hand is all our family lives in Sheridan still. And man, comparing it to Houston, like we'd have to get some slam dunk jobs to come back to Sheridan. And
Wow.
so cost of living, and maybe Sheridan's in a bubble, probably like Jackson, some other parts of Wyoming, but I think those two are the largest things for us if we ever came back. Is do we have employment, that we could afford, and then could we even afford a house, if we moved back? So
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's kind of funny to think for some of us here in Wyoming that, the cost of living in Sheridan is, comparable to a city like Houston. So, yeah.
even Denver, we lived in Denver, it, I guess Sheridan, I would be biased. Sheridan, Wyoming's better than Denver, but just for people moving into Denver too was kind of like you guys are, I don't know. So yeah, it's crazy. Cost of living, the housing in Wyoming is gone up.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Aaron. Dalton, your thoughts. Do you want me to repeat the question?
No, I think I've got it pretty well
Okay.
down. Yeah, I think Dylan's point and Aaron's point are both really, really true. And especially as I was younger in high school, trying to find things to do, especially in the winter, was always difficult. We would try to get super creative with things to do, but I think some sort of a shared space, and I don't know what that means. Maybe it's an arcade, a movie theater, somewhere where younger people under the age of 18 can go and do. And I think that there's this weird age between kind of 16 and 21 before you can go out and drink. We and go to the bars, where I feel like there's a lot of culture around doing that. There's got to be other things for those younger people to go and do that maybe aren't centered around, going to grab a beer. So yeah, I think that's maybe one. The other thing I would say is like amenities. I try to eat fairly healthy, and I think more when I'm saying amenities, like grocery stores. And I know that's a big ask. Like, how do we bring in a couple of grocery stores is interesting to think about. But like we have a couple of health food stores in Sheridan that my family basically grew up going to religiously. And I think it's very hard to get the right produce in Wyoming because we're so far up the supply chain. But produce is something that's kind of an interesting point to look at. And I think just healthy options are something I'm always looking to do more of. And if there was more of those in the state, like Cheyenne, I think has done a really good job with Sprouts being there. And I mean, obviously, we'd like to see that in every town, maybe a local version of that. But yeah, hopefully that's a good answer.
Yeah, fascinating. Okay, thank you. And I believe I'm going to turn it back over to Tennessee. Thank you all. I'm going to turn it back over to Tennessee. She has some targeted questions for you.
Yeah, and maybe I'm the only one, but I for some reason can't see the results to our poll. So can we share those? Oh, there they are. So big group of you between 18 and 40 on the joining us today, which is great. Great to have all the ages here, but love to see young folks in the room. And it looks like availability, I actually can't read the entire thing. It's cut off for me. Availability of meaningful jobs in their field. That was the factor that got the most votes. Yeah, so chew on those results, and I'm gonna keep asking questions. This one is for you, Tristy. I heard loud and clear that Wyoming is a place that you want to be. You've got a foothold in a construction career. You like the outdoors. There's things that you love to do here. And I'm curious, since we know that young people are leaving the state, if friends that you grew up with who aren't able to sort of stay in the state, like, do you worry that you might build a future here amongst newcomers as opposed to the folks that you grew up with? Like, are you seeing the out migration happening in a way that kind of actually impacts the makeup of your community and the folks that you know?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I feel like I surround myself with very similar-minded people to myself, but I also know like my siblings are all going for careers in different industries and the opportunities aren't as abundant for them. And so I think there's a good chance that they would move away to find better job opportunities, which I think is totally valid. But I also see that support around this state and the people love where they live. And even one of my best friends in the program with me is from California, and she moved out here last year and absolutely fell in love with it. So I think there's definitely two sides to that of people that are like, I want to get out of here. And I completely get that because I did that my freshman year. But I also think there's a good influx of people coming that are like-minded and are like, wow, this state has a lot to offer. This is great.
Great. Thank you so much. Dylan, we're going to go back to you. I want to touch on your involvement in Wyoming civic life. You've got practical, academic, and career reasons for leaving Wyoming that you've already laid out. But I'm just curious, how have your experiences with civic engagement and some of those connections that you've made, have those things made you question that desire to leave the state? Or has your civic involvement helped to inform your decision to want to leave?
Yeah, that's a great question. They have made me question a lot because I'm going into political science. I'm going into politics essentially, where connections really, really matter, right? And surprisingly, I live in Wyoming. All my connections are in Wyoming, whether it be with legislators or people who work in the lobbying industry here. And I already know quite a few of them are already built up. Even friendships with them, where that relationship has just developed quite a bit. And leaving that all behind and having to restart like that networking would be very difficult. And now, I don't think anybody wants to remake relationships like that necessarily, So yeah, my civic history, with stuff like that has made me question if I want to leave or not.
Gotcha. Thanks. And we are curious to hear from the audience. Again, we've got another poll. This time, do you feel that young people's perspectives are considered in Wyoming's public decision making today? I'm going to let you guys do the poll and move on to another question. Aaron, I'm curious. I think you have touched on this a little bit already. This is for Aaron and Dalton. I think you could both answer this. But the general idea is like, is the grass greener? You found opportunities outside of Wyoming. But I'm curious, like, what are the challenges that you found in bigger cities, and what is it that you pine for in Wyoming? What do you miss about this state?
Yeah, that's a good question. And then I was going to respond to Emily Hawkins. So Emily, I'm not going to type this out. So as of right now, is the grass greener here in Houston? I have to say yes. My career right now is in a better spot. Obviously being in oil and gas, cost of living, we can afford a house, all these things. You know, what do I miss? Kind of some of the young panelists here, and then obviously growing up in Wyoming is the recreational part. Of course you miss that when you're in a big city. But you have to kind of take that, you have to weigh those pros and cons. And that was kind of Emily Hawkins' question. And, tax benefits, definitely something as the young panelists maybe they need to think about is there are some states that, that have income tax or some other taxes. Colorado being one that's kind of changed recently, so that was rough when we were in Colorado. But Texas is very similar to Wyoming, so it's kind of the same. Um, yeah. To answer the question, right now it is, and I guess it's more kind of focused towards, I'm in that career building mode, so that the benefits here in Houston are just outweigh what would have been in Wyoming. So
Other folks with experience outside of Wyoming want to tackle that grass is greener question as well?
I'll chime in, Tennessee. I genuinely thought the grass was greener for a period of time. When I was in my young 20s, I was in college, I was working at Starbucks and living what I thought was my best life. I had found a health club that I loved. I got to do spin class, right? Things that I wasn't able to engage in Wyoming. And I didn't find, and Shay Ward had asked this question too about the sense of belonging. I was really upset when Starbucks said, hey, we're sending you to Laramie. We want you to open a store. That was back in 2014. Still in my girl, I was 24 years old, and I was like, the heck you are. I felt like I was leaving a community that I had connected to, but that sense of belonging didn't chime in, like I said, until I started serving. And now I can't imagine raising my kids anywhere else. I love to be able to go to a business after hours and see 20 people that I genuinely want to hug and celebrate, right? I love that I can call up my friend at Meals on Wheels and say, hey, how can I serve you, right? I love that it's easy to get access to boards. Now, that wasn't a value of mine when I was living in Colorado. It was a very almost selfish mindset of what's in it for me, what can I find? We've talked about recreation as a barrier. But finding a community I can connect into that was greater than myself was really powerful. And that's what made me love and appreciate Wyoming again, that I didn't have in my youth.
And can you just tease that out a little bit more for me? I mean, you had a shift in your values and how you wanted to spend your time, and service is an important part of your life. But I imagine there are lots of people volunteering and serving in Colorado. So I'm curious, like, was it something about Wyoming and your return to this place that oriented you to that? Like, was that shift a result of something you saw at play in communities here?
It's the small town tight knit. I mean, I think Chris said it earlier. It's small town Wyoming, right? We've heard that so many times. It is easy to build community when you're intentional here. I had a small one in Colorado, but it was very small. I couldn't walk into Walmart and see 5 people that I knew. Now, for some people, they don't like that, right? And that's okay. They want to live in their bubble. But for me, I love that. I have grown to appreciate that. And it took a friend of mine saying, hey, we need a board member. And I said, well, I've never served on a board before, but I can give it my best shot. And this is when I had transitioned into banking. And they brought me into the fold and they helped build that purpose for me. And now I couldn't imagine not doing that. And so you have to truly appreciate what Wyoming has to offer in the sense that we have just less than 600,000 people that genuinely care and love the place that we live and want to make it a better place. That's why we're having this conversation. But you have to want to be part of that. And there was a good chunk of my life where I had no desire to be a part of that. I just wanted to explore.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Dalton or Tristy, do you want to weigh in on this question? As folks who've also had experience outside of Wyoming, I'm wondering, your response to the grass is greener question, or if there just were things like assumptions that you had about what it would be like to leave the state that were challenged.
Yeah, I'm happy to grab that one next. Something that I would say, I moved to Florida and got down there and it's like, wow, I'm from Wyoming. I'm not used to the humidity. So that was kind of a big hit for me. But The other thing is I'm an avid outdoorsman, so I love to ski and I love to fly fish, and that is not something that I could do from Florida. And I actually found myself flying all the way back to come and ski. And then it wasn't a matter of, hey, is there snow this day? Which ski resort am I going to go to? It's like, hey, I'm going to plan this out and pray that there's snow in the forecast. So I think that was a big one for me. The other side is that I don't know, I'm young, I work remotely, so it doesn't matter where I'm at in the US, I can kind of work wherever I am. So I think that is an interesting kind of aspect. Doesn't really matter, you know, which part of the country I'm living at. I can work anywhere. And I think building on that, the things I'm able to do outside of work are really what are going to draw me to live somewhere, what those look like. And for me, Tampa, Florida was not that. So
Great produce, bad skiing
exactly.
in Tampa.
That's
Okay,
exactly what I would say.
got it. And what about for you, Tristy? How was that time out of the state? What did that challenge assumptions? Did it shift your perspective?
Yeah, so I moved out there. I moved out to Tennessee when I was 18, and I still did Casper College online. So I still had that Wyoming connection for school, but really just wanted to be somewhere new and had similar mindsets sets to some of the other panelists of I don't want to go to UW. I don't want it to be like high school again. And then when I got out there, I loved it, but I really missed that sense of, like Victoria said, walking into Walmart and being able to say hi to five different people or kind of being able to build a legacy and leave a legacy when there's not as many people around you. And I think Victoria said it really well of there's people that want to make this state better. I was able to be a part of the Wild Sports Ranch project up in Casper and watching the community rally around that to build something better for our youth was super cool. And I did Skills USA and a couple leadership organizations throughout high school and college, and really just found a love for the service and leadership aspect side of that. And I think in a state this small where you have so many people rallying around young kids and supporting you, it's so much easier to try to build up and grow that legacy for something to leave behind when you go versus starting somewhere brand new and having it's you can still make those connections, but it's going to always be easier in a small town Wyoming setting versus somewhere brand new where you don't know as many people.
Great. Thank you so much for all these answers. And I want to let give folks a chance to see the response to the poll. The question, do you feel that young people's perspectives are considered in Wyoming's public decision-making today? Yes, constantly just got a couple votes, sometimes 34. Rarely was the most popular answer, and not at all. So yeah, that's definitely something that's important to think about. I'm curious, this wasn't my next question, but for the panelists, looking at those responses, do you all, for you personally, was that, the extent to which you feel like your viewpoints are considered, was that a part of your calculus in deciding whether to stick around or go? You don't all have to answer it, but just whoever wants to jump in.
Yeah, I can take that. As a young person who is in politics, quite frankly, I don't feel like I'm heard at all. Even though I've built all these relationships with people, most of them really aren't with legislators. There's a couple of them that I have talked to quite a bit, but for the vast majority, it feels like they're not even willing to talk to me, or they're not even willing to listen to me, or just give me the time of day, really, of where if I email, I'm not going to hear anything back. And that's very concerning, honest, quite frankly. As legislators, they're supposed to hear their constituents, and I just don't feel that happening.
I'll kind of combat that maybe just a little bit. I've had the opportunity to speak on quite a few different panels this year, and maybe on the front end, we're not seeing it, but I do believe that young people's opinions weigh a lot harder on some of the harder conversations. And the more that all of us young people can get out there and kind of voice our opinions, I think it truly does have an impact. We might always not see or hear that impact, but I think when people get to hear our sides of the story, it's a lot more meaningful.
Yeah,
And
Thanks for that perspective. Go ahead.
so to answer the question, like for us, that wasn't in my thought process of, oh, I'm not getting heard. But I kind of hear Dylan and Tristy here, but it kind of goes back to my original question of, I think the question should be to legislators or to the state, what's our vision in 20 years? Like, so kind of back to the investment idea, like if if the constituents want, hey, we're going to do all these massive investments into the youth, okay, then we're going to have that discussion, and so to Dylan's point, maybe that feels like it's getting brushed to the side, like, no, that's not our vision. And so, but maybe that's the question everyone needs to be asking is, what are we asking for the state to do? For our situation was housing. I don't really think there's a legislative thing that they could do to stop people moving to Sheridan. Tourism, rodeo, the beautiful mountains, I'm not sure what you do from a state legislative standpoint to stop that from happening, but for youth to have things to do, that's a completely different conversation. So I hear Tristy and Dylan's comments, but I think kind of goes back to my first question of, we need to have a vision, so if that's what the state wants to do, then that's the conversation. If not, then it might seem as though we're ignoring it. But anyway, so that's just for a personal perspective, right? That wasn't our thought, like, oh, I'm not getting heard for a free house, I guess, in Sheridan. So
Gotcha. Anyone else want to add to that? I think that is a great point, Erin. Like, what is that vision? And then if the vision is to provide more services and to support young people, then they need to have a seat at the table in shaping what that looks like. I think that's
100%.
what I'm hearing you say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks for this rich conversation. Also, it's really great to hear contrasting perspectives. That's a really important thing. We don't want this to be a monolith. So, Tristy, I really appreciate you speaking up with a slightly different take. This is for everybody to consider. You don't all have to answer it, but anybody's welcome to answer it. Given that mindset can influence action, I'm mainly thinking about this like as an athlete, right? I can do hard things if I tell myself it's possible. I'm just wondering how talking about Wyoming's youth exodus shapes young people's sense of what's possible here. And for you personally, it's like multiple parts. Like, were you aware of that idea that lots of people leave the state? Did it sort of factor into your sense of what is possible here? And like, just thinking about that, is there a balance for you between an accurate portrayal of Wyoming's outmigration and optimism? So sorry for all the pieces, but you're a smart group, so I think you can probably get them all. Whoever wants to go first, jump in.
This one.
Thanks,
I actually think that talking about Wyoming's youth outmigration is actually really positive. I think the first time that I even conceived of that big idea was in an internship my freshman year of college. I didn't really even realize it was a problem. I just felt like the issues that I found with Wyoming were my own individual issues. So I think that knowing that so many people have the same feelings, but also knowing that people care about these things and they want to change Wyoming for the better, or for change it so that young people feel that they want to stay, I think that that's actually really valuable and even entices me to stay in Wyoming more.
Thank you.
Jump on this one too. I've been aware of this from the get-go, and it's something when I was approached about the panel that I brought up. I remember in high school the governor having this be a huge topic of conversation, and I think we've been through, I think we're on our third governor since high school, right? For me at least, and it's always come up, how do we keep our young people here, right? And so for one, that's a little concerning to me that we haven't been able to solve for this as fully, but I think there's a lot of really great things that are happening too. We're seeing an increase in young professional organizations. I belong to two in Southeast Wyoming that keep me engaged and have pulled me into advocacy, which that is not an area of work that I've ever wanted to be in, but I've seen in the comments, I mean, there's a lot of things happening in our legislature right now. And if we talk about not being heard being a reason why we leave, we have to be willing to speak up at the same time, right? And I think there's some fear in that and knowledge of how to do that. But we've done some really cool things. I think of the University of Wyoming, the College of Business. They started their career tracks. And so they do a career track to Casper, career track to Cheyenne. I hired someone from that career track to start a career in finance straight out of college, and he's thriving. And so we have to be willing to be creative to find opportunities. Even things like CTE, right? That wasn't available to me in 2009. We didn't have CTE programs. My husband grew up in Ohio and he got to do trades while in high school. His sister graduated with a CNA, right? Those were things accessible that Wyoming has barely even started talking about. So if we want to build skilled labor, if we want to create job opportunities, if we want people to come out of high school, stay and find a sense of belonging, we also have to be able to be willing to invest in those opportunities for them. And we have barely even scratched the surface on that.
So two of you have said it's positive we're having this conversation and, getting the idea out there that young people leave and actively trying to figure out ways to help them stay. Does anybody have a different take on that?
Tennessee, I was going to jump in.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to say that it's not positive. I think it's positive that to have the conversation, but I agree with um, um, Victoria that same kind of the conversation's always been around, right? And I think it's there's good and bad, when you're growing up. And then like for example, my dad, born and raised in Wyoming, went to the University of Wyoming. He also left, computer engineer, went to Silicon Valley, built a career there, and then but came, worked his way back to Wyoming. And then I think everyone else also on here, I think this is not a inflammatory thing to say. We know somebody that we grew up with that was like, I'm moving now and I'm never coming back, and they probably haven't, right? And it's from the get-go, like they're like, I'm sick of Wyoming. I'm, just whatever it is. And I think that it's a positive and a negative. I think many of us have mentioned some things that's tough about Wyoming. The weather, winter, not a lot of people can live here in the winter in Wyoming in the winter. Some people can't handle the small towns, so I think it's a positive and a negative thing of having the conversation and then kind of what I was going to say is it like I think Gwen kind of said is it makes you think about what do you really want? Do you want to go live in New York City? Do you want to live in Houston? Where you've got all this nightlife, you've got these sports, you've got all these things you can travel, or Dalton came back, to hometown Sheridan, Wyoming, and Victoria came back to Wyoming. So it's what do you really want at the end of the day? And so I think the conversation's always good for that. So I was gonna say kind of it's a good and a bad, right? I think we got to make sure the conversation it's not a bad thing to leave, like because you can't change people's minds, but and that's maybe what they want in their life. But you can talk about the positives about Wyoming, I think, and that's what this conversation does. So that was my comment on that.
Thanks. Anybody else want to weigh in on that question?
Yeah, I'd like to say something. Yeah, I really agree with Aaron. I think that's a really good point of where, it's important to have, and it's important not to vilify Wyoming, but also not vilifying anywhere else. But what's most concerning to me is that we're still having these conversations. I know somebody else was talking about how the past 3 governors was talking about this, and still it seems that we haven't made any progress on the issue right now. Like kids are still moving out. So what have we seen that's like made them want to stay? It seems like, obviously I know a lot of people that plan on never coming back. Um, and even though I do plan on coming back, I can totally understand why, honestly. Um, it just, it's felt like even the more we talk about it, we still haven't made any progress in actually solving the issue.
I'll jump in really quick. I think everybody's made great points. I think kind of to Aaron's point, sometimes of getting what you want out of it, sometimes it takes leaving to come back. And I think that's true for quite a few of us on this panel of seeing, going out, having that grass is greener mindset, and then coming back. And to Victoria's point, CTE was super beneficial throughout my high school career. And I do feel like we've made leaps and bounds of progress with where we are with CTE today. And I think that people advocating for it and the work that's being put into it at the high school and now the university level is going to be super beneficial for getting kids to stay or really supporting that mindset around it.
Great. Thank you all so much. That is all of the questions that we have, and I'm really excited to dive into some of the questions from the audience. We're going to do one more poll just for folks to sort of think about. Buy me a second to look at the questions. If you could sit down with a Wyoming policymaker, what would you want them to understand about why young people stay or leave? So chew on that one, and I'm just going to take a look at the questions. There's a lot of great stuff coming in. Thanks to the audience for contributing questions. So we were just talking about educational opportunities. So I am going to take a question that's related to that. Someone in the audience wants to know, does defunding of the university concern you as young people seeking a variety of educational opportunities? So does the proposal to defund the University of Wyoming concern you as young people seeking a variety of educational opportunities?
I can hop on this one. I would say that absolutely it does concern me. I mean, the big reason that I still am in Wyoming is because access to high quality education at the University of Wyoming is like fiscally accessible. But I think that I've gotten so much out of the University of Wyoming, and because of that, I feel so much more inclined to stay in Wyoming and give back to my communities. I mean, at the University of Wyoming, there's unparalleled access to your professors, there's small class sizes, there's opportunities for amazing internships and study abroad programs, and with like funding available for those things too. So I think the prospect of defunding the university to any extent is really concerning, because I think a lot of the things that make people want to stay in a place like internships that give you connections, those things are attached to the university having big programs and all of these things of that nature. So yeah, I would say it's concerning.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that? Dylan, I saw you unmute.
Yeah, I would like to talk about this a little bit. My favorite statistic ever is that for every dollar you put into a child, whether it be through education, whether it be anything you put in, especially with education, you get $12 in return. So watching them take out a large portion of that money that's going to kids, even if they're 20 plus, um, that's very concerning, because I feel like that will have just detrimental effects on the economy of Wyoming. Just looking at it like the economy wise, financially, I I think that's very concerning, and that's very worrying for me. Especially if I'm looking to be educated. So I would want to live in a place that values my education, and this kind of shows that we might not be there.
Thanks. I'm going to move on to another question from the audience, unless somebody else wants to jump in on the education funding question.
Yeah, just real quick, Tennessee. I think me being like the old guy in the room, I guess. I don't recall off the top of my head, and I should preface with, I think I know the state of Wyoming. I mean, really everywhere right now, the political climate is very diversive, or I don't know, clickbaity. So I always caution with the term defunding. If I'm correct. The Wyoming Constitution, I think there's always funds set aside for the University of Wyoming. So I think that defunding question is a little, what does that mean? Like, how much are we talking about? So I kind of want to preface that, but you know, defunding any education, I think like K-12 in Wyoming, I think that's always a hot, like, make sure I think we've already talked about that. Like, what are we giving to our young people in the state before college? Are we doing trades or some sort of apprenticeship type training? And then I think that question goes to the university as well, is what degrees are we giving to out at the university, and things like that. But of course, any defunding of the only state school would be a concern. Um, but I think like I know athletics is getting cut. I mean, so a lot of money that comes from the state. That's a lot of money. So I think there's constitutional things that the legislators have to think about when your economy's not really good, doing really well. There's a balanced budget effect that you have to do. But that was just my two thoughts. Being I guess an old head already graduated from a long time ago, but
Yeah, sure. Thanks for flagging that. And I do think language is important. So folks might hear the term defunding and think all the money is gone, and that's not the proposal that's on the table. And it is just a proposal. The legislative session is going to start on Monday, and there is a budget that the House and the Senate are going to work through, and everything in there is up for debate. But the proposal that the Joint Appropriations Committee voted on was a $40 million cut to the university, which is approximately 11% of the block grant for the state's university. And I'm reading that from a WyoFile story by Maggie Mullen. So that's my source. This is a question about cultural concerns. So I'm just going to read it as it was written. Would any panelists like to speak on the topic of cultural concerns? I found it to be a common reason young people leave and a common reason young people don't come from elsewhere. Yeah, so what do folks think about cultural concerns? There's a related question that sort of raised issues around DEI and school library policies, inclusion of transgender athletes. So I'm not 100% certain about what cultural concerns mean, but I'll leave that up to the panelists to interpret that. But maybe in your answer, you could sort of define what you think cultural concern means to you and whether that's factoring into young people's decision to leave or come back.
Yeah, I'd love to kind of take that one. And I don't know if I'm going to take the kind of political turn that maybe some people are wanting me to, but the thing I would say is I feel like growing up in Wyoming, I have a very narrow lens at which I've grown up to see the world. And so in traveling, I think that's something we should try to get our youth to do more of and get a very more macro view of what the world is like, and try to bring that back to Wyoming. And I think, yeah, there's a lot of things that Wyoming does really well. And I think that there's a lot of things that people might not know are going on in the world that you wouldn't necessarily find just by always living in Wyoming. And I think there's an interesting stat around people who are born in the United States, and how frequently they're able to travel out of the US. I think that I've been fortunate to be able to go and travel a couple times out of the US, and I've learned a lot through experience and seeing different cultures and how people interact, what mannerisms are like. So for that sense, I mean, I think Wyoming has strong culture. It's just, and maybe I'm not taking the right kind of approach to this question, but that would be my kind of 2 cents.
no, I think Dalton's kind of jumping on. I think what the person asking the question. I think Wyoming gets a bad rap for maybe those perceived, and maybe they've met people that have some of those views. But I actually look at Wyoming's culture as a benefit in regards to work ethic. Some values. We've all talked about we value education. We value entrepreneurship. kind of the public lands, there's many states that don't have public lands, things like that. And so I think those are good, but I think what Dalton's getting at is there is definitely a perceived, it's kind of like that stereotypical, I guess, cowboy redneck that people think
Mm.
we have, and maybe that, and I don't know if that's something that can really ever be addressed. I mean, you know, uh, if that's where they grew up, that's what they think, and same for people that grew up in Wyoming. You're not going to know, Dalton probably didn't know things in Tampa, Florida. Like, how would he, the human, like, just cultural things. Like, you're not going to know those things. I didn't know things when I moved to Houston. Like, how are we going to, you're not going to know until you're there. So to that point, like, yeah, travel, go th see things. But, yeah, I'm not really sure what they're kind of getting at with that question, but that was kind of when Dalton was sharing his thoughts, that was kind of what was going in my head
Mm.
there.
Victoria, I saw you unmute.
Actually going to say something very similar to Aaron. Growing up in Wyoming and being back both in a position as an employer and, working and building a living and a career here, Wyoming's taught me hard work. It's taught me grit. It's taught me how to care for other people. A lot of those core values that I mentioned earlier, I've learned that through just experiencing the culture in Wyoming and the people that are here. There's also different cultures in different counties. I live in Laramie, and it is a very different beast, than even Cheyenne, where I work. And where I grew up, and it's different than Jackson and Sheridan. And I mean, everywhere you go, Lusk operates differently, right? And so, I mean, even seeing different parts of our communities that make up Wyoming, my eyes were even opened, if you would say culturally, being at the university because of the diversity. Because of the international students and the different activities I can engage in and festivals that happen and parades and marches, all kinds of things are happening regularly. You just have to be willing to engage in conversation and to be open-minded and to learn. And that's how you shift culture. That's how you broaden your worldview. I don't think Wyoming has a culture problem. I think you have to be willing to engage and see it.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that question, maybe with a different take? Curious, maybe Gwen, you're on the University of Wyoming campus now. Does this idea of, cultural issues, cultural concerns, how do you feel like that's factoring into your conversations with peers about whether to stay or go?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's actually the biggest driver. I mean, I think there's definitely people who would want like a more liberal climate, you could say, and they plan to move somewhere with that climate politically. But then there's people who are very happy with the climate here, and I think it's a really like diverse spread of that. But I don't think that that's like the main thing that any of us are thinking about. And I think something that I do think about though is just the accessibility of our state legislature. So when I think about that question, I was thinking of it kind of from a political standpoint. And I just think that like there are things that I'm unhappy with here, but I think I have like truly unparalleled opportunity to like talk to my state legislators and like email them and testify in committee and all of these things. And so I think that I actually would really appreciate that in Wyoming. So yeah.
Thanks. So this is the last question that we're going to take from the Q&A. I just want to say we got a lot of great questions, so thank you so much for participating. And this one's pretty specific, but this person's curious if access to healthcare, and particularly maternal and reproductive care, weighs into any of the young panelists' decisions to stay or leave.
I'll jump on that first because that
You
was
touched on it.
yeah, that was a decision for us, my wife and I. And it kind of goes back to the economic opportunity. Um, obviously if you're a nurse or a doctor or a lawyer in Wyoming, you're probably fine. You probably could get some good health insurance. Same if you're a teacher, but outside of that, if you're not, it's very tough. So that was a consideration, on top of the economic and housing for us.
That we're very close to being out of time. So is there one more person who wants to weigh in on that question about healthcare?
Yeah, I would like to say something. Not even just about healthcare specifically, obviously this is included, but I think generally the biggest factor is accessibility as a whole, whether it be with housing, especially with housing, especially with healthcare, and just like the ability to have stuff, to have stuff that will support you. And living in just, we're very population wise, we're a very small state. And with that comes less stuff just naturally. And how do we fix that? I'm not necessarily sure. With more people leaving, our population might go down, and with that comes less accessibility. So it's kind of, catch-22 there of where it is kind of happening. So I'm not quite sure what to do about that. But yeah, that's definitely a huge factor, is accessibility to basically anything.
Well, thank you so much to Dylan and Dalton, Tristy, Gwen, Aaron for participating. We just skimmed the surface, but what we did get to talk about was so rich. And I want to pass the mic over to Rylan O'Brien to let y'all know about some ways to keep this conversation going.
Yeah, thank you, Tennessee. And just wanted to start by thanking all the panelists for their time and insights today. I really enjoy these discussions. They are a hot topic across the state, and all of your insights help inform decisions in the future. So really appreciate your time. Just wanted to introduce myself. I'm the Venture Development Manager with the Business Council. I help manage the YVC fund underneath the Business Council, but I also sit on the Engage Board of Directors. Engage started with Governor Mead's Endow initiative in 2018. And we experienced some brief downtime during COVID with the number of struggles with the pandemic, but we are relaunching to continue gathering young voices and insights to inform policy and strengthen communities and shape Wyoming's future. So just a quick plug to an additional sequel event that will be in person to these discussions. It will take place at Blacktooth Brewing in Cheyenne, March 2nd, 5:30 to 9 p.m. We'll have panel discussions with statewide leaders in partnership with Braver Angels, and we'll continue these discussions, but have some networking following that panel at Blacktooth. So if you're interested or want to stay tuned with what Engage has got going on, please feel free to use that QR code on the screen to sign up to join our mailing list. But thank you.
Thanks. And Josh, you have 1 minute to wrap us up.
Well, as Rylan said, thank you to all the panelists, and thank you, Tennessee and Dustin, for partnering here. This has been a really good conversation. And what I want everyone to always remember is that I think looking critically at the thing that you love the most and the thing that you want to improve in the future is a really key component of it. I think we could choose to sweep things under the rug or to ignore them. But I think when you really love something, like as much as we all love Wyoming, you want to do your best to make it a better place. And you want to do your best to leave it better than you found it. And I think all of us are hoping, all of us with a lot of gray hair, are hoping that we can leave it better than we found it for all of you. And I hope that your voice is heard, because after all, people like me are making decisions that folks like you are going to have to live with. And I don't want to do that in a vacuum. And so I think conversations like today are super important. It's so important that 470 people signed up for this webinar to watch it. I think at one point we had over 270 in the conversation and listening and watching and asking you questions as well. And the idea that we can all get together and come up with one answer, that's just not going to happen. This is a complex problem. It's going to require a lot of different perspectives. It's going to require us to try some things that may or may not work, and then try some other things as well. And I think that it's going to take all of us working a little bit to do that. And so from my perspective and looking at the Wyoming economy as much as I do, I appreciate the effort that you've put in. I appreciate your voices, and I appreciate that you all have a love for Wyoming and share that love for Wyoming with me and others to be able to make this place what we all want it to be. And so thank you again for those that joined us. We had parents, we had legislators, we had young folks across the state, really good mix. And let's keep the continued conversation going, because if we do that, I think we can make a huge difference in the future. So thank you all.